Thank you, Donald, and good evening, everybody. Well, Boris Johnson, of course, has criticised Chequers repeatedly, resigned over it. David Davis, the Brexit secretary, resigned over Chequers. We had callers ringing in to this show and others here on LBC, outraged by Chequers, believing it to be a betrayal. Many in the Conservative Party already publicly spoken out against Chequers, even Mrs May's friends in the press, many of them critical of Chequers. But she must have been quite optimistic, I think, heading off to Salzburg in Austria, heading off to a European summit to discuss her Brexit plan, given the very large number of concessions that she made. I think she would have gone over there thinking, well, at least I'm going to find a bit of support over there. Oh dear, 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 because here was Donald Tusk, the boss of the European Council.
At our EU27 working lunch today, we had a good discussion on Brexit, which once again reconfirmed our full unity. We reconfirmed that there will be no withdrawal agreement without a solid, operational and legally binding Irish backstop. And we continue to fully support Michel Barnier in his efforts to find such a model. We agreed to have a joint political declaration that provides as much clarity as possible on the future relations. Everybody shared the view that while there are positive elements in the Chequers proposal, the suggested framework for economic cooperation will not work.
Oh dear.
Not least because it risks undermining the single market.
It will not work, says Donald Tusk, in what he described as a good discussion. Well, I'm not sure who it was a good discussion for, but clearly not for Theresa May. And just to reinforce the point, Jean-Claude Juncker, the boss of the European Commission, was questioned how he thought the talks were going.
How close are we to getting a deal? How close are we?
To what?
To getting a deal.
On what?
Brexit.
This is how it.
Far away, said Jean-Claude, with the bells ringing in the background. So really very little joy there. Chequers will not work, is what we're being told in the European Union. Well, perhaps even more surprising for the Prime Minister was an article that appeared in today's Daily Telegraph by Camilla Tominey of the Daily Telegraph, and she had done an interview with Sir Mike Penning, former Armed Forces Minister, and this is important, very much a Theresa May loyalist, in fact one of those who was part of her 2016 leadership campaign. So a supporter of the Prime Minister, a friend of the Prime Minister, and certainly in terms of Brexit, if you looked at the party and said, well, that's a hard Brexiteer, that's a Remainer, Mike Penning, pretty much a political moderate within the Conservative Party, and as I say, friend of the Prime Minister's. This was Sir Mike Penning being interviewed about that Telegraph piece.
I'm not part of any group. This was a decision I came to over a period of months, that the British people voted for something, and she's put a proposal forward and basically saying to the likes of me, you've got to vote for this or else go sit on the naughty step. Well, I'm not going to sit on the naughty step. I'm 61 years of age. At the end of the day, I was elected to do a job which was standing up for my constituents and say what I thought. If anybody thinks this is going to undermine her, I think they're wrong. Actually, what it will say to the rest of Europe, she can't be dictatorial. She can't just force this through, like some of the leaders perhaps in Europe think that she can. And this will give her a backstop. But she does need to know that there are moderates, loyalists in the House of Commons of her party, she's my Prime Minister, that will not vote for Chequers.
Well, in the interview, he actually went on to say that she was deluded if she thought she could persuade Tory Eurosceptics to vote in favour of it. And Sir Mike Penning there making the point. He's not a member of any group, not part of Jacob Rees-Mogg's 60-strong European research group or anything like that. And that would have been, I think, a very big shock to her. So, being rejected in Brussels, being rejected in Westminster, being rejected in the country, not looking that pretty really, is it? But here was Theresa May.
So yes, concerns have been raised. I want to know what those concerns are. There's a lot of hard work to be done, but I believe that there is a willingness to do a deal. But let nobody be in any doubt that, as I've always said, we are preparing for no deal. So that if we get to the position where it is not possible to reach a deal, then the British people can be confident that we will have done what is necessary to ensure we make a success of leaving the European Union, regardless of the terms on which we do so.
I would suggest that particular speech was not too long on sincerity or belief. Didn't sound like she really felt things were going that well. The way she phrased it, we have concerns. Concerns, Prime Minister. One of your best mates in the House of Commons has said you're deluded. He's going to vote for your Chequers plan. So she's in real trouble. Given the enemies of Chequers that are lining up on all sides of this argument, is it time for her to admit she's in the wrong place and chuck Chequers? And if you think, yep, it's time to throw in the towel, call me on 0345 6060 973. Or maybe you think, stay strong and stable and stick to the script and it'll all be okay. Well, text to 84850. Or maybe like me, you think this is a good opportunity actually for the Prime Minister to do something better. If that's how you feel, tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC, and of course Facebookers, you can watch us live and comment there too, as you do in huge numbers every single evening. My view, folks, for what it's worth, is she was talked into this Chequers deal by her own civil servants who played a superior role to David Davis, which is why he simply had to walk away. Barnier played the Northern Irish card to an extent that she allowed herself to be boxed in. That is what Chequers actually was all about. It's a deal that will not free us from the European Court of Justice. It's a deal that will tie us into a European rule book. It's a deal, it's the wrong deal. This is not, Chequers is Brexit in name only. It simply isn't good enough. And I think if the Prime Minister recognises that she's in a completely unwinnable position, she has a fantastic opportunity to not just chuck Chequers, but to go back to Brussels and say, right, I know we've spent 2 years talking about this. I know we haven't got long left. But here it is, folks. We have decided that actually, rather than opting back in to bits of the European Union, we're going to have a clean break. We are leaving everything. We're leaving the single market, we're leaving the union, we're leaving the regulatory agencies, but we will make this one big, generous offer to you that we can have a free trade deal with you and you can have a free trade deal with us, very much along the lines recently negotiated with Canada, but we can do better than that on services and other things, and that, we think, is even better for you than it is for us. It solves all the questions of the Irish border, which you keep repeatedly raising. And I tell you what, you've got until the end of November to take it or leave it. And you know something? I believe, and I've been saying this now for a week, there's a change of mood in Europe. There is big pressure coming from German industry and elsewhere. I think at the 11th hour, they would accept that deal. And that would be the best outcome possible, I think, for both sides. If not, she makes it clear we leave on World Trade Organization rules, which are far from a disaster, as that's how most business in the world is done, but it would lead to some short-term disruption. That is my view. Mrs May, chuck Chequers, take it as an opportunity. What do you think, folks? Should she now realise that defeat is inevitable and chuck Chequers? Jason, who's a regular caller from Sutton, is on the line.
Hi, Nigel. You were doing so well then. I was almost agreeing with you at some point. And then you kept talking, and then you proved that you have no idea what you're talking about. Again, Nigel.
Right, okay, so
you keep doing it,
Jason,
my friend.
tell me why tell me why Chequers is a really good deal.
Chequers is dead. It was useless, it was pointless, and it was asking the European Union to do something that they cannot possibly do. Basically break up the four freedoms of the single market, which is a fundamental underlying principle of the European Union. It would be like, in terms of population size, it would be like someone like Kazakhstan coming to the United Kingdom saying, I demand a free trade deal with the United Kingdom, but I only want to deal with England and Wales, and I don't want to talk to Scotland, and I don't want to do anything with them. I want you to break up the United Kingdom in order to be able to work with us. It's just a ridiculous proposal, Chequers, and that's where you and I are in agreement.
Right, so we agree about that. So if she chucks Chequers, what next?
Well, the only options on the table are, as you said, no deal.
Yep.
And the EU are saying you have to accept the EU proposal to solve the Irish border situation.
Which we don't.
And the EU situation of a proposal is that Northern Ireland stays inside the customs union and it is treated differently to the rest of the UK. Theresa May has said there is no way that any Prime Minister could ever accept that. Because she'd lose the support of the DUP and her government would fall, obviously.
Which is a practical reason, isn't it?
Well, for her personally, yeah, it's a bit of a problem. So I spent last Thursday and Friday in Geneva. We met with non-stop pretty much for 2 days with international trade lawyers, geopolitical policy writers, people who've been doing this stuff for donkey's years. WTO rules in the UK, the opinion of the most experts that I've certainly ever come across, is that the first trade deal we're likely to get, after we leave with a cliff edge and no deal Brexit, we would spend the fastest, quickest deal we get will probably be with a country that's got a liberalised trade policy similar to the UK's, somebody with a democratic, liberal-style government similar to the UK's, and that would be Canada. That would be the quickest, fastest deal the UK would get, and that would take about 2 years, is their best estimate, if everything went smoothly.
Well, Jason, I mean, hang on. The Australians managed to negotiate a trade deal with America, which negotiating time was 10 months start to finish, so we could do better. But anyway, Jason, your point is... So what is your point? Are you saying that if she chucks Chequers... I mean, what do you think she ought to do? Because we're really asking. She's got this dilemma, hasn't she? She's got everybody opposing Chequers, including you and me. What do you think she should do?
I tell you what, she definitely should do. Any responsible Prime Minister would be on the plane to Brussels tomorrow saying, or maybe October 19th, after the next summit, when it's categorical that we run out of time, there is no deal on the table that's viable or feasible proposed by the United Kingdom. We haven't settled the Irish border situation. The UK government haven't done anything sensible towards the withdrawal agreement. In 2 years, we've faffed around, wasted our time arguing amongst ourselves in Chequers and in Westminster. When she realises there's no deal and the catastrophic effect of that...
Jason, come. I know your opinion. Come to the point. What should she do?
She should go and withdraw our intention to leave the European Union.
Right, fair enough, Jason. No, that's your view. That's fine. Alan on Facebook agrees. It's not time to chuck Chequers. It's time to chuck Brexit. Well, that's the view of some so far. It's not my view. I think she will be forced to chuck Chequers, and I see it as an opportunity to go back to the European Union and to push them for once, rather than them pushing us around. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on RBC. It is now 6:15 and time for the news headlines with Lisa Aziz. Given that no one likes Chequers, Chris says to us by text, when your friends and enemies tell you no, you've got to work out something is actually wrong. Chequers is an exercise in insanity. Mrs May just hasn't got it in her to stand up to the EU. She should have been tougher with them from day one, because right now the EU are laughing at her and at all of us who voted for Brexit. She needs to up her game, says Vince in Exeter. Well, there's lots of advice coming in. Tina says May will never chuck Chequers. She wants to keep us close to the EU. Well, maybe, Tina, one of the reasons the EU want to chuck Chequers is they want her to concede even more. Quite possible. Let's go to Bristol, speak to Ben. Ben, good evening to you. How are you?
Nigel, we're together again. It seems like a while, doesn't it?
It does. So tell me, should she chuck Chequers or stick with the plan?
Well, I'm recovering a little bit from that ramble the last caller. Don't people like to think they know everything about Europe and the future? But I mean, you know me, Nigel.
Well, we like experts. We like experts, Ben, even if they're,
experts. Yeah. Well, look, you know me, Nigel. We've clashed a few times. The one area you and I have clashed a little bit has been on Theresa May. Now, when she came into power, I thought, this is the right woman for the job. She's the woman of the hour. And I stand by that. I think she's, in many ways, been a really good Prime Minister. I think at heart, she's a decent woman. But, and here comes the but, and I'm talking to you kind of in real time, processing in real time, I felt, Nigel, when your Brexit secretary resigns the day you put out the Chequers plan, something's gone wrong in the machinery there, hasn't it? I started to sway a little bit. I mean, I actually think that she seems to have gone into a mode that reminds me a little bit of Mrs. Thatcher, with the poll tax, where a leader can get into this stubborn mindset where they're not listening to the voices around them. And I think if she doesn't make the adjustments that would please to some degree, the pro-Brexit type, not entirely, there's always a few things that you wanted in there that aren't in there. This is going to become her poll tax, I think.
Do you know, Ben, it's very interesting you say that. It's very interesting you say that, because one of the real outbursts of anger has come from the Tory membership out there around the country, and Tory voters too, of course. And one or two of the veterans have said that they detect more anger in the party over this than they did over poll tax back in 89-90 with Margaret Thatcher. So she has to bend and adjust, Ben, yeah?
Yeah, and I'm not coming as one of these people who said from the beginning, called her names and said she's rubbish. I thought in many ways she's been terrific. But this recent, I watched that Panorama show, and it's the first time since she's been in government. I thought, I don't like the look of this. I don't like that look in her eye. I don't know where she's. I felt her leadership has become increasingly compromised over the last time. A leader can go if you try and please everybody on something like Brexit. It's not going to work, is it? You're going to compromise your authority.
Yeah, no, I agree, Ben. Thank you. Interesting perspective there, Ben, who's been a consistent supporter of the Prime Minister. Come on, over the last couple of years, and we've disagreed on it, but even he thinks something needs to give. Helen is a brand new caller from Banbury. Good evening, Helen.
Good evening, Nigel. How are you?
I am well. Now, Theresa May, she's in a hell of a pickle on this, isn't she?
Yes, she is indeed. Your answer as to what should we do about the Chequers plan, bin it. It should never have happened, in my opinion.
Right.
I don't believe that Mrs May or the government are listening to anyone. I actually delivered a petition to Downing Street with my group members. We're of a group called thelistbrexit.com.
Right.
With over 1,200,000 signatures, including, I'm pleased to say, Dame Joan Collins, if I can say that.
You can.
Mine. To say that leave means leave. You gave the decision to the people.
Yep.
The people, I mean, if we are still living in a democracy, I think we are, gave your answer. The Chequers deal is not leave.
It's leave in name only, isn't it?
Exactly.
That's Helen, no, absolutely, you're perfectly clear. She must chuck Chequers, and the pressure is, when even Sir Mike Penning is saying it, the pressure is becoming enormous. What would you like, just briefly, to see her do instead?
Yeah, I mean, but what does the EU come up? Her obligation is to us, to the majority of the people of this country, country. And like the chap said earlier, I mean, he was speaking very nicely, but I don't really care. Well, I don't care whether I like her or not. You're not there to be liked.
No.
You're there to do a job.
So what should she do, Helen? What is the next tack?
Get a backbone.
Get a backbone. All right, there we are. There's advice from Banbury. Get a backbone. Stand up to these bullies in Brussels. Ian is a new caller from Newport in South Wales. Ian, hello.
Hello, Nigel. Nice to speak to you.
Welcome. So, Ian, is Chequers, should she chuck it? Is it dead?
I think it could be the biggest rabbit out the hat she will pull. She's an intelligent lady. She is. To get Prime Minister, she's intelligent. Everybody's telling her to chuck Chequers. I think she'll come right to the end in October and say, right, Chequers is gone. We're going to go Canada plus and pull the rabbit out the hat.
So, Ian, all right, I'm listening to you very carefully. Why not do that right now?
I think she's a bit of an ego, and she's going to get all the plaudits when she does it.
Right, so you would like her to go to the position that I want her to go to, but you think she plays it cool for a bit before she unveils that plan?
I'd like her to do it now, like you, absolutely. But I think she's got this ego trip going on, and everybody's telling her to chuck it, and she's thinking, right, I will when I want to. And she's going to play the game right to the end.
OK, Ian, I understand that, but when you're leading a party and there is growing discontent within that party, and when you have, within a fortnight, your party conference coming up, you've got to do something to sort of quell the restlessness, haven't you?
You have, but I think her ego has just got the better of her,
all right.
Basically, I think.
OK, no, Ian, interesting point of view. Ian thinks she will do the right thing, as I see it, but she'll play it cool and do it a bit later, like a rabbit out of the hat, was the description. David is a new caller from Preston. Welcome to the show, David.
Hi, Nigel.
Welcome. So, is Chequers finished now, given the levels of opposition everywhere?
I think Theresa May's finished. I think continuing with Theresa May now is just a complete waste of time. It's wasting the country's time.
Well, David,
she's not going to check. I don't agree with the last caller. She's not going to pull anything out of the hat. She's trying to please everybody, and she's pleasing nobody.
Yes, I agree with that.
The EU don't want Chequers. Parliament don't want Chequers, about 90% of them. It's a busted flush. It's flogging a dead horse. What we need to do is, Theresa May needs to be sat down by somebody and explain that she's basically going a bit deluded.
As Sir Mike Penning said, yeah.
Yeah, and we need to install, I think, in my opinion, David Davis, who's a Brexiteer. He's quite level-headed, and he's been in the room with Michel Barnier for the last couple of years, so he knows how the land lies. install David Davis as a temporary emergency Prime Minister
Yep.
to get Brexit through, and then we'll take it from there.
David,
After March.
you would trust David Davis in this situation more than you trust Boris, would you?
Absolutely right, yes. Yeah.
Okay. No, that's a very interesting point of view. David, thank you very much indeed for your call. And David says she's a disaster. Trouble is, folks, I've been arguing that, as you know, consistently here for a very long time. And a lot of you contact me and say, oh, you're being so unfair. But I've never thought she was right to be Prime Minister, certainly not at this stage of our history. But they should have gone for it back in July. That is the moment she should have gone. They could have sorted out the leadership election contest during the month of August. It's very difficult to get rid of her now, given time is running out. Nothing's impossible, but it's not easy. Neil is calling from Stanmore. Hi, Neil.
Hello, Nigel. I think it's quite interesting. I think there's a point within every negotiation where you put your pen on the table and you say, we've had enough, we're not doing any more. And she's actually got a pretty strong position because the party's against her, Parliament's going to be against her.
Yeah.
So go back to Brussels and say, sorry, guys, tough luck, we're not going to do this, we're out of here. But I've got a very interesting question on Ireland. Where do the ferries go from that take all the goods from Europe to Ireland?
Well, that depends, doesn't it? I mean, Rotterdam, probably mostly.
Is there anything that actually goes to Ireland from there? Because I think most of the freight actually comes through the UK.
But much of it comes through the United Kingdom, which is...
I think the vast majority of it does. I don't see where this issue is with this hard border, or soft border, or freight border. It's all coming through the UK anyway.
Well, not all of it, most of it probably, yes.
Most of it is. So it's a complete red herring, the objections that Brussels are throwing up. I just don't get it.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's constantly being raised, Neil. I've got a text here. The problem is Canada doesn't have a physical border. You can't compare the two when I talked about a Canada-style deal. Neil, you know, if you look at this Irish border situation, right now today, there's a different currency, different income tax rates, different excise rates, different corporation tax rates. There are massive differences between the north and the south of Ireland, and tariff, if that's what we get to, would be one more factor. I frankly, Neil, cannot see what the problem is. I would have thought Ireland should be screaming for a free trade deal more than anybody. Not, as you say, just because of the goods that go back and forth between the UK and the Republic, but because of the stuff that is transhipped to and from Europe through the United Kingdom. Would make sense for everybody there to have a tariff-free deal, wouldn't it?
I think so. So I think we should just be turning around saying, thank you very much, guys. We're off.
Yeah. And you know what, Neil? They'd come running after us because they'd have their big car industries and wine producers saying to them, for goodness sake, don't let these people run away. They're such an important market. We call them Treasure Island. Thank you, Neil, for your call. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It's now 6:30 and time for the news with Lisa Aziz. Well, Theresa's dilemma, does she chuck Chequers, given that Brussels doesn't seem to want it, her own side don't seem to want it, the country doesn't seem to want it? Is it time to chuck Chequers and go for a better plan? Before I get back to that, if you watch live sport in this country, in, you know, whether you like soccer or whether you like rugby or you like cricket or whatever it may be, you'd have noticed that nearly all of it now is on commercial television, and every single ad break you are bombarded by the bookmakers, bombarded with bet now, England to score next 2-1, you know, who's going to get the next 50, who's going to score the next goal, whatever it may be. And yeah, it is ever so slightly annoying because there are a lot of those adverts. But interestingly, today, the Labour Party, and Tom Watson did this, have called for a ban on gambling advertising during live sporting events in a bid to tackle problem gambling. And Labour say that a report has found there are 430,000 identified gambling addicts in the UK, 25,000 of whom are under the age of 16. So that's what Labour want to do. They want to ban gambling advertising during live sporting fixtures. And yeah, you know, there are people out there with a huge gambling problem, as there are people out there with all sorts of problems with drink or excess food or whatever it may be. And I suppose I speak as somebody that likes the odd bet, but I don't want the state regulating every aspect of my life. I want some freedom. I want to be able to make my own mind up. It's a commercial market, and if I don't like all those adverts, I can always turn over and watch another sport on another channel, or listen to LBC, or do whatever I want to do. I just feel this solution that is offered every time is we ban things. And it used to be a left-right thing, but, you know, if Labour were in office and they banned this, the Conservatives wouldn't get rid of the ban. They would support it and stay with it. Too much government interference in our lives is my view. No shortage of opinion and thought on Theresa May. Guy says, for God's sake, Nigel, she needs to dump Ollie Robbins. He's the civil servant, very much behind the Chequers deal. And start trusting her MPs. Dump Chequers and go for Canada or WTO. Nigel, she is cunning. Second call we've had on this line tonight. She is waiting for Corbyn to commit to another referendum next week at their conference and then slam dunk a Canada deal. So some of you think that, you know, this political genius out there is going to turn this round, produce a rabbit from the hat. Confused. Why do you think Theresa is so opposed to a Canada-style agreement? If it's such a good option, why is she blocking it? As for the Irish border, simple. We refuse to build it. Let them do so, says Martin in Cheshire. Martin, the biggest mystery to me of the whole Brexit thing is ever since I did a live radio debate with Neil Kinnock back in 2001, when he was European Commissioner, and he said, look, if Nigel ever got his way, which he won't, but if Nigel ever got his way and Britain left the European Union, if they wanted to have a free trade agreement instead, that would be no problem. To Giscard d'Estaing, the former French president, you know, I've had this conversation with him. Well, if you wish to be demoted to a country of the status of just a free trade deal with the European Union, that can happen. He thinks us leaving political union would be a demotion, but the prospect of a free trade deal was always there. So for nearly 20 years, I've met people in Brussels who've said, look, if you want to leave all of our structures and just have free trade, you can do that. Why is it that this Prime Minister, in her negotiations, has never actually gone for a simple free trade deal? Why is it we're going for this bedeviling complexity where we effectively want to stay part of little pieces of the single market? Has Tusk got a point in a way? Do they think effectively that we are trying to cherry pick bits of membership of the European Union? Might it be better to be more open, to be more honest and saying, we're leaving everything, we'd like free trade, and we know your exporting companies would like it too. Let's go to Karen, who's calling from Bracknell. Karen, good evening.
Oh, good evening, lovely Nigel. The woman needs to grow a backbone. She needs to start supporting our country, and she needs to give them an ultimatum, a deadline, and walk away. And
would they come after her, Karen, in your view?
I don't care if they do.
You don't care? No.
Because if they don't give us what we want, we won the vote. She's to get what we want, and if she doesn't, I will be marching on the streets at your side.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you really feel that angry, Karen, about all of this?
Very. And if I cannot vote UKIP, I will not vote ever again. If she goes back on what we were promised, and I heard her Mansion House speech, and if she goes back on it, then that's it. I will march on the street.
And Karen, it's not just you. There are people, you know, and it's not just Conservatives. I think the same could happen with Labour. If Labour continue down their current route, you know, of heading towards whether, and we'll see what happens at their conference, they may well try and avoid it at their conference, but if, as Labour gradually heads towards this position of endorsing the single market, the customs union, of perhaps going for an extension of Article 50 or even a second referendum, you know, my biggest worry about this is what it actually does, Karen, to people's trust, faith and belief in the entire democratic system in this country.
Absolutely. People they're shot to pieces with this. They really are. These politicians have got to start giving us what we want. They're just procrastinating, and it just is not good enough.
No, Karen, I get it.
Imploding.
I get it, Karen. We voted for it in a referendum. We voted for it again in a general election. And if there's any marching to be done, it'll be done peacefully, and that I think is the really important thing. Karen, I thank you for your call. and for your passion. Sam says, why, oh why, are we even negotiating with these numpties? We owe them absolutely nothing. Irina, no deal is the best deal. Let's be independent and be ruled by our own elected representatives. Catty says she should be stressed. She should do what we want. We pay her wages. Well, that's an interesting concept, isn't it? It's as if, yeah, we are the masters. Catty, you're right. It doesn't often feel like that. Let's go to Bury and speak to Peter. Good evening, Peter.
Good evening, Nigel. I will put this as best as I can.
Yep.
Now, I'm losing my faith in religion at the moment because that's the way the world's going. But I have faith in the people, which is democracy. We voted for a Brexit. Now, the situation that I have is the best way I can put it to you. It's a disaster today. It just shows you that she's gone away with her tail between her legs. I want you to get together with David Davis, Boris Johnson, people in the Labour Party, and you know who they are. I want you to form a cross-party committee that will sort this out, and which it should have been, Nigel, right at the beginning when we left. Cameron got it totally wrong. He ditched the ship.
I do agree with that, Peter. I do agree with that. I do think in the wake of Brexit, there should have been a cross-party attempt to deal with it, and it was never, ever done, was it?
Now, my father is 92.
Yep.
He fought in the war. He's a tank driver.
Yep.
He said, when we left, we had to pull our sleeves up and get on with it ourselves. We gave the money we had, we gave it to Germany to rebuild. We've done it then, and we can do it now. And that's what he says.
Well,
we do not need an unelected commission run by conspiracy, whatever you want to call it, the Kabbalists. We do not need these people. They need us.
Well, I think the economic reality of it, Peter, is that you're right. And I agree with that. We just need to believe in Britain a little bit more, which clearly your old dad does. And I thank you very much indeed for that call. To Exeter, in Devon, to speak to Roy. Good evening, Roy.
Oh, good evening, Sir Nigel.
Good to hear from you. So, what's to be done, Roy?
Oh, all she's doing is kicking the can down the road for as long as she possibly can until you were spot on and Karen's spot on. And until, Labour make their position clear, and then she can do the complete opposite.
For party advantage?
For party advantage. She's not really looking at this from the country's perspective. This is all about the party and the party machine.
And where do you think, Roy, in your assessment, where do you think Labour are going with this?
I think Jeremy Corbyn will probably be forced into giving it a second referendum eventually.
Despite being a Brexiteer himself?
Despite being a Brexiteer himself, he will have to abandon his own passion, essentially. But again, tribal politics. We need to get rid of it, Nigel.
It is, I have to say, Roy, tribal politics is loathsome. We saw it 25 years ago at the time of the Maastricht Treaty. It was that tribal politics. It was people, in the end, voting for something that they despised and they publicly condemned for the last couple of years that kind of got me involved with new politics in this country. I hate tribal politics, Roy. I'm with you completely. Thank you. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It is now 6:45 and time for the news headlines with Lisa Aziz. So the European Union don't like Chequers. Donald Tusk really not very complimentary at all, saying it will not work. One of her own big supporters, Sir Mike Penning, saying the Prime Minister is deluded if she thinks people like him are going to vote for Chequers in the House of Commons. Is it time she chucked it? Before that, an extraordinary story. A 3-year police campaign based in Croydon after over 500 cats were found dead and in many cases mutilated. And I don't know how much money's been spent by the Metropolitan Police over the course of the last 3 years, but it would be difficult to think it wasn't perhaps approaching 7 figures or something of that order. I know that LBC have a request in to find out this information. We don't know the answer yet, but whatever, a lot of police time and money spent investigating, hunting down the Croydon cat killer. Well, some news today. It's been announced that actually the injuries to the cats are due to fox predation post-traffic accidents or other events. So cats have been hit by cars, they've been killed. Desperately sad for the owners, of course it is. And it's the foxes that have then been basically cutting them up. And who knows, the foxes may have killed some in the first place. Folks, I'm sure there are some listening to me now who, you feed foxes, you think foxes are fantastic. Foxes are pretty, but I don't know many animals out there that kill for pleasure. But that's what a fox will do in a hen house, and it's one of those species that we need to control. That's my view. I know some of you will hate me for saying it, but I believe it to be true. Back to Mrs May, back to Chequers. I think she should chuck Chequers, use it as an opportunity to go to the EU with a very, very clear plan and a deadline and say, take it or leave it, folks. Now, Roger on Facebook says something which I agree with, but from a different perspective. He says the UK needs to walk into oblivion. I'll be laughing with the rest of the world. Who is ever going to trust the UK in negotiating trade deals now? Roger, your perspective on this is different to mine, but actually, what was really interesting was in the aftermath of Brexit, countries, a couple of dozen countries from all over the world, queuing up to negotiate trade deals with the United Kingdom, then to have it explained to them, well, look, I'm afraid we've got to trigger Article 50, and that took 9 months. Article 50 takes 2 years, so we can't do anything for 2 years and 9 months. And then we're applying for a transition period after that, meaning that it would be at least 5 years before we could sign anything with anybody. I think whichever way you cut this, Roger, and from whichever side of the argument you are, thus far, the way this Prime Minister has handled Brexit, not just with the European Union, but actually on the world stage, does not look particularly impressive from a British perspective, and I really do believe that quite strongly. I'm going to Manchester to speak to Andrew, who's a new caller to this show. Andrew, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. How are you?
I am well. So she's in a bit of a bind, is she not?
Yeah, I think she's simply left it too late. Of course, one of the huge difficulties she has now is she's only got a couple of months to go to do the deal. She's not going to be able to get a mandate from her own party now to do anything else but the Chequers plan. She's probably going to try and finish off that negotiation, take it to a vote in the House of Commons, and ultimately I think that's probably going to fail, and she's going to end up going after that and leave us in a huge constitutional crisis from the way that she's handled it. There simply just isn't enough time now to put anything else credible together in the short amount of time she has before it has to go back to a vote in the Commons.
So you see a big dramatic moment in the Commons between now and Christmas, yeah?
Yeah, ultimately she hasn't got the support of her own party. There's no cross-party support for the deal that's going to be done. She got rid of her best negotiator in David Davis. She's a weak negotiator herself, and I heard Dominic Raab, the current Brexit secretary, on LBC yesterday evening, and I frankly don't think he has the skills or experience that David Davis has to put the deal through or get it now on reasonable terms from the EU, and it's all a bit too little too late.
So Andrew, if you're, and you may well be right, I must admit I've been thinking this in my own head, that she does a deal of some kind in the end with the European Union. She comes back to the House of Commons. The Eurosceptics say, we hate this. She says, vote for this, because if you don't, you'll bring down the government, there'll be a general election, and Corbyn may well win. What would the Eurosceptics do then, in your opinion, Andrew?
I think they will say, let's leave and let's go out with no deal, because that is going to be better than the proposal that's been hashed together at Chequers, which really, in the eyes of the majority of the electorate, has really no credibility to it. And I think most people would rather leave on those terms than having some kind of deal pushed together with scaremongering and the kind of masses that George Osborne was putting together before Brexit ever happened. And
if a rejection, Andrew, meant leaving on no deal, I wouldn't be as worried as I am. My fear is that Parliament will do everything it can, literally everything it can, to stop us leaving on a no-deal basis. But let's see. Andrew, you're right, though, to point out there really could be a major constitutional crisis at some point between now and Christmas. I agree absolutely with that. Let's go to Ireland and speak to David, who lives in Cork. David, good evening.
How are you?
I'm okay, David. Looking on at these... I mean, you'd have thought at least Donald Tusk could be nice to her.
Nigel, I'm sitting in disbelief watching this. We're listening to non-entities like him deciding when and what will be done. I mean,
non-entities, David. Yeah, I mean, you sound like that Farage bloke making rude speeches in the European Parliament about them.
I mean, seriously, what do you think Mrs Thatcher would have done in the same position at this stage? Do you think she would be tolerating this behaviour?
David, I'll tell you what. Mrs Thatcher would not have left Downing Street at 4:15 in the morning in December to fly to Brussels to meet a deadline imposed by an unelected bureaucrat and then concede to a backstop position in Ireland. She'd never have done it, David.
I agree completely. I really do. I just can't get my head round, okay, voted to leave, and yet she's now still saying the same message that I want to hear. Leave the European Union, leave the single market customs union, Court of Justice. But then let's read anything you've written or any of the other Brexiteers, everyone's saying that isn't what's happening.
She keeps saying it, doesn't she? She keeps saying we're taking back control of our money, our laws, our borders, we're leaving the common fishery. It all sounds wonderful. What she says sounds great. She does the opposite, David, time and time again. It's driving us mad. Thank you. I've got time for one last caller on this subject tonight. He's a new caller to the show. We're back to Exeter again to speak to Paul. Paul, hi.
Hello, Nigel. How are you?
I am all right. I'm just curious as to what this Prime Minister is going to do.
Okay. I sent the following email to you, John Redwood, Jacob Rees-Mogg, Boris Johnson and Andrew Bridgen.
Right.
I've come to the conclusion the only way for Brexit to be a success is to force Prime Minister Theresa May to resign. She should be made to see that if she continues as PM, Brexit will be at best be a shambles, and at worst Article 50 will be extended indefinitely. She should also be made aware that if she continues as Prime Minister until March 2019, then she will stop the Tory party being in power for at least 10 years, as well as not winning back the country's independence. If she is forced to resign, she can do so with honour, stating on TV that as a Remain PM, I have taken Brexit as far as I can go. It is now only fair, with 6 months to go, that I hand over my premiership as PM to only a leaver who is fully behind the decision to leave.
Well, Paul,
she leaves with honour and saves the leadership election.
Paul, I would have had no problem with this had it happened back in July. Had she gone as leader back in July, had Boris had the courage in his resignation speech, there'd have been time to have a leadership contest, to sort it out before these negotiations are concluded. Paul, and we're running out of time, but haven't she also? Haven't the party now run out of time to get rid of her?
Pardon?
Is there enough time left to go through a leadership contest and do these negotiations?
And made to see sense on TV instead of in front of the nation, then you don't need a leadership contest because you're switching it straight to the leader.
All right, okay, Paul. I've got the passion. I've got the view. Thank you, everybody. I'll be back here on Sunday morning at 10 o'clock, at 10 tonight.